Good afternoon, everyone. Lance Mechanist here with another World of Warships Legends video. Now then, I'm quite certain you're curious as to what you're looking at. Well, I've been actually doing some looking on YouTube. I don't want to basically be following after an act. What I've noticed is a lot of people tend to showcase premium ships, higher tier, or some people actually focus on the branch-offs of the different ships. No one has actually, to my knowledge, done a startup, basically a showcase of some of the lower tiers. And that is what I'm going to be doing tonight. As you can see, I've already activated the filter for Class 1, or Tier 1. These are the ships that you actually start with. They are all cruisers, so they have some pretty impressive firepower. All of them are older ships, circa early 1900s, late 1890s, early 1900s. All of them basically come from the pre-World War I days, back with the armored cruisers, the barbettes, the turrets, and the flying bridges and whatnot. All of them are coal powered. Now then, for the Americans, for the United States, the Tier 1 cruiser is the USS Albany. This is a vessel that I've actually upgraded all the way. Since I've already got the Tier 5 American carrier, of course I'd have to upgrade it. Her ammunition, Tier 1s, with the exception of England, start with high explosive shells only. This means that they set ships on fire. They do low damage. They do basic damage. Well, they don't do low damage. They do basic damage, but they basically set ships on fire. You only have one consumable, that is the damage control party. You still have access to boosters, but I'm not going to use any because I've already upgraded it, and I don't need camouflage. Her stats are, as you'd expect from starting ships, kind of low. Her survivability is 11. She only has 11,000 hit points. Her artillery, she only has 6 single mount 152 millimeter cannons. Her AA defense is basic because remember, she was early, USS Albany, I believe, was part of the Great White Fleet, which Theodore Roosevelt, the president of the United States at the time, had sail around the world in a sort of goodwill tour. So her AA is the 37 millimeter Maxims. It's not particularly effective, but it's better than nothing. Her maneuverability, max speed is pretty good for the ships of the time, 20 knots. Rudder shift time is 7 seconds, which again for the ships of that period was actually pretty good. And turning radius is good for Tier 1. Her concealment is basically there. I'm by no means an expert, I'm by no means an expert. I'm just showing you the Tier 1s. I'll be showing you a few at a time in the videos. My videos can't be too long, but I'll be showing you Tier 1s from all the series, maybe taking them into a few battles to show you how they respond and how they work. And this is her armor. Now, as you can see with the armor, let's go ahead, shut off all the armor except for the hull. This is her fore and aft end armor. As you can see, the light blue, it's about 15 to 16 millimeters. Let's see. Yeah, she's lightly armored, about 6 millimeters. The fore end, that's the deck. Let's see. All right. Hang on a minute. Whoops. Sorry. Did not mean to do that. That's her superstructure armor. As you can see, she is extremely heavily armored in the command area, the conning tower. That's where the flying bridge is. That's where the commander would be issuing orders to his ship. These are the armored, this is the weapons. Now this is the, now again, because this is early ships, this was before enclosed turrets were actually commonplace. Check that. They were common on larger ships, but for fast cruisers and destroyers of that period, or torpedo boats as they were called, they, instead of fully enclosed turrets, they had shielded turrets. These turrets were open in the rear and shielded from the top, the sides, and the front. The armor's pretty decent, but against conventional modern weapons, you might as well be trying to protect yourself with a paper bag. Her citadel, that's the core of the ship where all the vital areas are. On a ship like the Albany, this would be where the boiler rooms would have been held, the coal storage, the engine room. That is basically where where all that major machinery would have been. Which is why when you take hits to the citadel, the core of the ship, you get critical, it's basically a critical hit, severe damage. The armor is penetrated, and you've got possibly flooding in those vital areas. And lastly, yeah, that's the Citadel Armor, I think, itself. Yeah. That's the interior armor of the ship. That's the exterior armor, the auxiliary room armor. Alright. Altogether, they paint the picture of a fast warship, lightly armored, for good enough armored for the time. And again, let's see. Her perks are she's a reloader, so she's got fast recoil speed. But she's slow. She's got below average maximum speed. Ship was built in the United Kingdom for the Brazilian Navy, but was purchased by the United States government. When commissioned, Albany was the most successful cruiser in the U.S. Navy. Despite relatively small dimensions, she carried powerful armament for the time. She entered service in 1900, and there were 2 in her class. And again, back in those days, there was... Most navies nowadays, you picture the paint being battleship gray. Basically, that's the generic color. But back in these days, there were actually 2 different colors. You had war camouflage, which was various camouflages or gray paint. And then you had peace paint. This was used for peaceful demonstrations. As you can see, her hull is completely white, and her superstructure is painted a gold bronze coloring. She's got gold lettering on her fore and aft ends. There's the crest of the United States there on her stern. That would also be usually where her nameplate would have been, somewhere around that area. And on her bow, you can see the crest there. Basically, these are her parade colors. These were the colors she wore when she was a part of the Great White Fleet. It's kind of interesting when you think about it, isn't it? But then again, why did the Navy switch from using these kind of paint schemes? Well, that factors actually into cost. It is more expensive to repaint a warship for peace colors than it is to actually paint a ship for war and let it stay that way. Because a ship may be called to war at any time, and you don't want a great white and gold ship sailing the high seas towards an enemy fleet. That's basically painting a big bullseye on you. Okay, that's the American ship. The next ship is the Japanese. Now, on a fun fact, the American and Japanese ships, these are the 2 ships you start with. In fact, when you first start World of Warships Legends, these are the 2 ships you have to choose from. After you complete your first introduction battle, Then you get the chance to purchase other tier 1 ships and then work your way up to higher tiers. Now, the Japanese ship is the Chikuma. She is a very old cruiser, as you can see. I've upgraded her. She's got high explosive shells and damage control party. Her stats are about the same. She's got 8 152 millimeter cannons. She's got 2 6.5 millimeter cannons. Maneuverability, concealment, and her hit points. She's actually got more hit points than the American. And her armor's her armor looks to be somewhat thicker as well. But then again, that's the it all depends on the placement of it. As you can see, this is, hang on a minute. This is her hull plating, fore end deck, athwart ship, her bottom, her aft end plating. As you can see, her armor for the aft is, for the most part, it's in the light blue, 6 to 14. But in one section, it is dark orange. That's 76 to 160. The next group is the superstructure. As you can see, lightly armored for the most part, except again for the commander's bridge. Unlike the Americans, though, the Americans had thick armor covering their open turrets. The Japanese ship has relatively thin armor covering her weapons. This is the upper deck, and that is the Citadel. Now, as you can see, the Citadel armor is relatively thick, except at the ends and on the top. This is to protect the vital parts of the ship again. And when you overlay it with the when you overlay it with the armor hull for the hull, you really don't see it interfering with the Citadel much. So that highly armored area was most likely officers' quarters or something like that. Okay, overview. She has superior high explosive damage, so she does greater damage with her guns. But again, like the Albany, she's slow. And the Chikuma, forgive me if my knowledge in other ship areas is kind of fails. I enjoy my history. I study it avidly, but I am not an expert at it. But Chikuma was designed as part of the program to create a high-speed fleet using the latest technology of the time, basically using technologies that Japan had adopted from the United Kingdom, the United States, the back then it was the Russian Empire. Actually, this ship was entered service after the I think it was the Tsushima War in the early 1900s. In which case the Japanese fleet saw action against the Russian Imperial Navy and absolutely obliterated them. It was actually one of the greatest upsets of the period, was that this great empire, the Russian Empire, had been trounced by a nation that many had considered backwards and uncivilized. Anyway, first in Japan, and the first light cruiser in the world, one of the first light cruisers in the world to be equipped with turbine-driven propulsion. Now, up until this point, ships had been equipped with reciprocating engines. You guys remember the movie Titanic, the big pistons moving up and down in synchronization? That is a piston engine. That is a steam piston-driven engine. A steam turbine takes steam from the boilers, channels it into a turbine which spins at high speed, and that in turn rotates the shaft which turns the screws or the propellers. The Titanic had two reciprocating engines on her port and starboard side. Her centerline engine was a turbine engine. This ship uses a turbine drive engine. She had decent armament and had a high top speed for her time. She entered service 1912, and there were 3 ships in her series. Alright. Now we get into other ships that you can unlock after your introduction to World of Warships Legends. First up is the British. This is the Weymouth class, or Weymouth. I hope I'm saying that right. I think it's Weymouth. Forgive me if my pronunciation's off. Again, she's upgraded. Her loadout, she is the only tier 1 ship that is equipped with armor-piercing shells. These are shells designed to penetrate armor and detonate inside. They can cause critical hits if the ship armor is thick enough. But if the ship armor is thin, they may over-penetrate the ship or go completely through the ship without doing any damage whatsoever, or absolutely minimal damage. They'll just make a hole through it. But if the armor's thick enough, the shells will actually arm and then detonate inside, causing extreme damage. Again, her consumable is a damage control. Her stats, she's got improved survivability. She's got more health than the Chikuma or the Albany. Her artillery, she's got 8 152mm cannons. Her AA defense, she's got 1 40mm Vickers cannon. That is, and one 76.2mm cannon. So that is a absolute minimal anti-air defense covering. You might as well have you might as well have your Marines standing on the deck firing bolt-action rifles at aircraft. But then again, these ships were all designed when air power was still in its infancy. The Wright brothers had only first attempted human flight in 1903. This was before the advent of the thoughts of what if we put machine guns on the aircraft and have dogfights, or what if we place a flight deck over the turret of a ship and have some crazy aviator launch himself off the flight deck to see how that works. This was before that. Her maneuverability is good and concealment is excellent. Her armor, this is her hull armor. As you can see, again, it's light blue. Very thin hull armor for the most part. Yeah, for the entire part, actually. Next is her superstructure armor. Again, like other ships, her superstructure armor is thin with the exception of the command house, or with the exception of the commander's area. Unlike the Japanese, she has high armor on her open turrets. As you can see, there's 8 of them. Let's see. Next is her upper area. Again, it's thin, but it serves a purpose. It covers the Citadel, which is there, and the armor for the Citadel is, of course, very thin. Thick. Very thick. Her skills are surgical shells. A short fuse time results in lower chances for overpenetration. So this ship actually compensates for having the ability flare for piercing, which is only equipped with armor piercing shells only. That means that unlike standard armor piercing shells, these shells can hit the ship and still do critical damage because they have a short fuse time. That means they explode quicker. This medium-sized cruiser had weak armor protection but boasted powerful artillery and high speed. She was conceived as a trade protection cruiser and was designed for countering lightly armed enemy ships of the same type. She entered service in 1911, and there were 4 ships in her series. Next is the Dresden. That is the German Tier 1 ship. As you can see, I have not technically upgraded her, but I have proceeded to Tier 2. Here we go back to the high explosive shells. Again, damage control party, puts out fires, stops flooding, etc. Her hit points, she's got less hit points than the Chikuma or the Weymouth, but still has more than the Albany. Her artillery, she's got 12 105mm cannons. Her anti-air defense, she's got 4 MG08 7.92 machine guns, 7.92mm machine guns. The MG08 was the German version of the famous Maxim machine gun. When Maxim made his first water-cooled machine gun, everybody, I mean everybody, purchased it. In America, it was called the Maxim machine gun. In England, it became known as the Vickers. In Germany, it became known as the MG08. Basically, every nation had a Maxim machine gun, but they all had different names for it. Maneuverability, she's got 25 knot high speed. That's pretty fast, considering the other ships. Her concealment is not as good as the Weymouth, but it's better. But it's about the same. It's about average for the Tier 1 class. And here we get into her armor. Again, follows the pattern, thin armor. Thin armor for the superstructure, except for the command housing. She has thick armor for most of her guns, except for the smaller ones. As you can see, the ones that are light blue. In the fore and aft area, those are her barbettes. That's basically holes cut into the hull where exposed guns are placed. To be honest, if I was a gunner on one of those ships, I would probably prefer to be in one of the shielded turrets than instead of one of the barbettes or the hull, because if you look close, you can actually see all the way through the ship where those barbettes are, where those I think they're called barbette cannons, where those barbettes are. Yeah, you can actually see all the way through the ship in those areas. Next, of course, is her auxiliary room armor. She's got some thick armor around the cannons, but again, her cannons themselves are thinly armored. And then you've got the Citadel Armor, which is way thicker than the ships we've seen so far. Alright, for the overview, she's got fast reloading times, but her guns are small. She's got smaller caliber guns than most ships of the Tier 1, only 105mm. A typical German protected cruiser of the early 20th century, Dresden could serve as a scout or raider or cover a ship squadron from enemy destroyers. She could boast a high speed for her time and very good armor protection. Compared with the majority of her contemporary enemy cruisers, she was fitted with numerous yet less efficient guns. Basically, it was the theory that it doesn't matter about the caliber, but if you can bring more guns to bear on your enemy, you can wear them down. The ship guns were good for the time. I mean, they could pierce light armor, but they just weren't as effective against heavier ships. She entered service in 1908, and ships in service was 2. Alright. Next is the French. Now then, with the French ships, yes, again, I've upgraded to Tier 2, but I have not upgraded the ship itself. I mean to correct that before we showcase battles. High explosive ammunition, damage control party, her stats, survivability about the same amount of hit points as the Dresden, 14,000. Her cannons, she's got 8 165mm cannons. These are big cannons. Alright, her AA defense, she's got MLE 1914 8mm machine guns. I think that was the French version of the Maxim. Maximum speed 23 knots, just 2 knots small, just 2 knots slower than the Dresden. Let's see, and her concealment's about the same as the Dresden. Her armor, hull armor, fore and aft, all across the board is low. We get into the superstructure armor. Her guns are actually shielded. That is some thick armor covering the guns. And of course the command bunker housing is heavily shielded as well. The rest of the superstructure is lightly shielded. And then you've got her armor, and then you've got her deck gun casings, the shielding of the cannons. That's also pretty good. Then you've got the auxiliary room armor. It's relatively thin, and the Citadel is lower in the water than the other. Is low. Actually, looks to be lower in the water than other ships. That can be a bonus. That can also be a hindrance itself. Here's the overview. She's only got one perk. That is big guns. This ship is armed with high caliber main batteries, 165 millimeters. All right, the Jurien de la Gravière, was the last protected cruiser built for the French Navy. The ship's silhouette and architecture were typical of French warships at the turn of the 19th century. Powerful 164 millimeter guns distinguished Jurien de la Gravière from the majority of foreign counterparts. She entered service in 1903. She is the only one of her class. And she's a 4-stacker. Alright, now we get into the other. Alright, the next one on the list is the Novick. This is the Russian ship. And again, Tier 2, not upgraded. Her upgrades are, let's see, her loadout is the high explosive and damage control. Her stats, survivability 14,000. She's actually got thinner armor than some of the other ships, only 6 to 50 millimeters. She's got 8 120 millimeter cannons. Her defense is 2 7.62 millimeter Maxim machine guns. 2 machine guns. She's got the same amount of speed as the Dresden, 25 knots. Her concealment's about the same. Now, you may be looking at the flag and wondering what flag this is. This is actually the flag of the Imperial Russian Navy. This was the Russian Navy before the Communist Revolution in 1917. This is before World War I. Again, Russia was an empire then. So yeah, different flag. Her hull armor is, well, thin. Her superstructure armor, again, except for the commander's deck, is thin as well. Although, unlike other ships, which we noticed was dark orange, meaning the thicker armor, that armor is actually on the thinner side. Her guns are shielded, but not by much. Those are that is very, very thin shielding on those guns. That is her, let's see, that is her auxiliary room armor and her Citadel armor. Now her Citadel armor is the thickest armor she's got. She's got it on the top and the sides. It's pretty thick. It's going to be difficult to hit Citadel shots on this ship, unless you've got the British, unless you're using the British cruiser. Alright. Now, with her perk is long reach. She's got a farther than average main, she can hit enemies from further away than any other ship. hit them before they hit you. The pioneer ship of a scout cruiser type, Novick carried rapid-fire guns but was weak in terms of armor. In the course of her service, she was the fastest cruiser in the world. She entered service in 1901, and she is the only one of her class. The next ship in line is the Nino Bixio. This is Italian. Now I have upgraded her and gone to tier 2. And again, she's a 4-stacker. Back then, the number of smokestacks was denoted speed. Basically, the more smokestacks you had, the faster you were. Yeah, I know. High explosive shells, damage control party. Her stats, she's got 16,000 hit points. That's more than some of the ships. So she's got high survivability. Her armor goes from 6 to 100 millimeters. That's pretty good. Artillery, she's got 8 120 millimeter main guns. AA defense, she's got 40 millimeter Vickers tourney light cannons. She's got 2 of them. Her maneuverability, maximum speed 26.8 knots, almost 27 knots. Might as well round up. That's pretty good. Concealment is excellent. Her armor, that's her hull armor, her fore and aft end armor. Again, it's blue, so it's thin. That's her superstructure armor, except for a small little bit up there. That's her commander's seat, I guess. Her commander's post. You know, now that I think about it, that is kind of an interesting looking superstructure design. But then again, well, the Italians, they always do interesting things. Her cannons, as you can see, she's got cannons going down both sides. She does not have any centerboard cannons. This means she can fire forward and aft, 4 cannons forward, 4 cannons aft, 4 cannons starboard, 4 cannons port. She's always got 4 cannons facing in any direction at one time. Oh wait, never mind, I lied. She does have some centerboard cannons in the stern area. Never mind. But still though, the cannons are actually pretty good. They're shielded, of course. They're open rear cannons, and they fall in the middle of the armor spectrum. Her auxiliary room armor is naturally thin, is of course, like all the other ships, thin. Her Citadel armor, her Citadel actually rises up a bit, so it may be easier to get Citadel hits on her, but that armor is also pretty thick. She's got a big Citadel. Yeah. Now then, her perks, she's actually got 2 positive perks. She's hidden, so she's got good concealment. That means she can get closer before she's detected, and she's also fast. This ship is the first one on our list that was actually built shortly before, well, around circa right at World War I, the start of World War I. Built shortly before the outbreak of World War I, this turbine-powered cruiser was to be used as a lightweight and high-speed reconnaissance ship. The vital elements of the ship were protected by an armored deck. She entered service in 1914. That is the year World War I started, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Austria. So there's only 2 ships of her class. And the last one on our list is actually a bit of an odd duck. This is the Xi'an. Now, contemporary knowledge says it's Chinese, but she is listed actually. She is actually listed as Pan-Asia, not specifically Chinese. Plus, with Pan-Asia, she is the only cruiser on the tech tree. She is the only cruiser on the Pan-Asian tech tree. All the others are destroyers. As you can see, I only just decided to play it exclusively for this video. I have not played with this ship. I have not upgraded it. This is going to be my first this is going to be my first sortie with the Xi'an, or Xi'an. Again, high explosive shells, damage control party. Her stats, she's got 12,000 even hit points. Armor is 6 to 38, so she is lightly armored. Her artillery, she's got 6 152 millimeter cannons, and she's got 10s, and she's got 1 76 millimeter Mark 10 cannon for anti-air defense. Her maneuverability, she's got 22 knots, turning radius 460 meters, rudder shift time 4.6 seconds, and concealment is about average for the tier. Now, her armor, as you can see, like I said, she's got thin armor. It only goes up to the gauge only goes up to 70. The spectrum only goes up to the dark orange, like the 34 to 75 millimeters. Her fore and aft end armor is naturally thin. Her superstructure armor, she doesn't even have an armored box for the commander. Her superstructure is completely thin armor. Her guns, they are not even shielded like the other ships. In fact, that is actually not shielding. I think that is actually the bracing that holds the cannon, the housings that hold the cannon on the ship. Yeah, that is not shielding at all. That is basically the frame of the gun that holds the cannon on the ship. Now, her auxiliary room armor, that's where we get into some thicker metal. It's green, whereas all the other ships were blue, and towards the lower part, it's orange. And her Citadel armor, oof, that is the complete reverse. That is the complete reverse of all the other ships. You'll notice that the Citadel is green in color. Her armor is thin in the Citadel. All the other ships had the orange, were in orange for the Citadel. They protected the Citadel, but this one not so much. I guess the armored belt for, when you look at this together, that is a very, very, very thin armored belt protecting the Citadel from any hits. Her only perk is Reloader. She's got above average reload speed. A light cruiser with reasonably good speeds for her time, but suffering from rather poor armament and armor. No kidding. The ship could act as a scout and destroyer flotilla leader. The cruisers of the class were the first ships in the U.S. Navy to feature turbine propulsion. They remained the only turbine cruisers in the U.S. Navy for a long time. Okay, so this is originally a United States ship, originally built for the United States Navy, but was sold, apparently, to the Chinese Navy. Hence why she's not flying an American flag. Entered service in 1908. I don't know if that was for the American Navy or for the Chinese Navy, and there were only 3 ships in the series. Back in those days, you see, even today, it is not uncommon for navies around the world to sell antiquated or old-fashioned or outdated ships to other nations. Some of the best examples actually are America selling World War I era Clemson destroyers to the British, or, well, as part of Lend-Lease, sending American World War I era destroyers to the British to help them bolster their fleet numbers. The older American SS boats being sent to Australia. The old American cruisers being sold off to Japan and China around the early 1900s as, you know, as parts of goodwill, or recently, let's see, kind of, well, semi-recently with the Falklands War, the the flagship of the Argentinian Navy was actually formerly an American heavy cruiser that saw service in World War II before she was sunk. And the Argentinians also had German U-boats. German post-World War II U-boats in their navy as well. So it's not uncommon to find ships of various nations serving in different fleets, especially around this time period. Okay, that was the general rundown of the ships. I will next be starting with the battles. I don't know if I'll be able to do PvP or not with Tier 1. I don't know, but I'm going to give it a try. So, this is basically going to be the first video of a series I'm doing. I'm going to be trying to do, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8. So I'll probably be doing 2 at a time, maybe 2 battles each, just to give y'all a show. So, this was the introduction of the ships, the showing of the ships, the showcase. Next up will be the battles, here right shortly. So stay tuned.